church. Did you know that? It was sinful, it was sensuous, you should never dance that horrible devil music. So of course, what did everybody want to dance? Beware of dogma, it has a bite. Beware of dogma, it wants a fight. Beware of dogma, it will ignite a holy war by itself. Beware of dogma, it'll make you blind. Beware of dogma, it'll trap your mind. Religious dogma, it's not designed to let you think for yourself. If we let it out in the universe, there will be no doubt everything is worse. Beware of dogma, don't let it loose, that unchained dogma, it'll reproduce. Tie up your dogma, there's no excuse for ignorance anymore. Beware of dogma, don't let it loose, that unchained dogma, it'll reproduce. Tie up your dogma, there's no excuse for ignorance anymore. Please, clean up after your dogma. Named Joshua. Whenever I was alone, he would come over to play. Cookies, cartoons, and punch. He liked all the same things that I liked. Cheerios and milk for lunch. Kitty cats, balloons, and kites. We were blood brothers, pals forever, as close as we could be. Nobody else could see him, but he was real to me. Sometimes when I was sad, I would send Joshua a letter. Never wrote me back, but he'd always come right over to play. I'd never been to his house, but I knew exactly where he lived, and his daddy was oh so nice to let us have such fun every day. We were blood brothers, pals forever, as close as we could be. Nobody else could see him, but he was real to me. When I was 5 years old, I got really busy with schoolwork and many new friends to get to know. Joshua moved away. Sometimes I missed him so. We had had such great times together. He had to go. It works out much better that way. We were blood brothers, pals forever. He was my very best friend.
nobody else could see him. I now know he was just pretend. Now that some years have passed, I can look back and smile at my childhood, at the times when it hurt to grow up, like when Joshua moved away. So do I just speak from here, or is there I can do this, I guess. So good morning on this beautiful Sunday morning, the day that no Lord has made. Oh, thanks. Maybe I can walk around in a bit. You know, I was a preacher. I'm a preacher, and this is Sunday morning, so of course you know what I have to do this morning, don't you? Take up a collection. You're right. So are the deacons ready on this? You all probably paid a lot to come to this, or drove a long distance. And thank you for doing that. As you know, I used to be a preacher, and I changed my mind. And I tell the story in my book, well, 2 books, Losing Faith in Faith in 1992, but then an update to that same story, Godless, how an evangelical preacher became one of America's leading atheists. And if you have the book, you read the foreword where Richard Dawkins wrote, Dan wasn't just a preacher. He's the kind of preacher you would not want to sit next to on a bus. And that was me. I was really that guy. You know that guy I'm talking about, right? You've met that overly confident, saving your soul, you know. Like Matt said yesterday, one of my favorite lines was, if you were to die right now, would you go to heaven or would you go to hell? You want to know for sure? What would you say if I said that to you? Where were you guys, by the way, back then? I would have done me some good for one of you to like poke me in the eye or something, you know. But no, did you keep your heads down? I had to have met some freethinkers, but and it would do a lot of good if you would speak up or say something at least. You don't have to like try to convert me right there on the bus, but at least say, well, thanks, but I don't believe that, and leave it at that. Just let them know that not everybody thinks the same way. I mean, that goes a long way. So now, instead of working for some other life, I'm working for this life, which I think is the only life we have, is the only life worth working for, the only life that we know exists for real. Like Robert Ingersoll said, one world at a time. You know, we have enough problems and enough purpose and meaning in this world to worry about, you know, pleasing the vanity of some slave master up there who needs to be worshipped forever. That's his problem. That's not our problem. We have our own problems here on this earth. So now I get to work for state-church separation. I get to fight the battle of church and state. And the core message I'm going to say today, I'll just say it right up front and then develop it, is that in the United States of America, we are free to disagree about religion. But we are not free to ask our government to settle the argument. That's basically it. If we want to have freedom to agree or disagree or argue among ourselves, as most of our founders really cherished because of previous history, then the government has to back off. The government has to butt out. The government has to fold its arms and be neutral so that you and I can have our freedom to argue, to persuade, to convert, or to ignore, to believe or not believe. Ann Gaylor, who founded the Freedom from Religion Foundation, likes to say, you can't have religious freedom if you don't have the freedom to dissent. If we don't have that freedom to say no, then you can't say yes. In fact, I often say to believers, you Christians should be applauding us atheists, because our decision to say no underscores your decision to say yes. If we can't say no, you can't say yes. So the fact that we atheists and agnostics exist and we are saying no actually strengthens your free choice if you think you have free will. So, but not everybody feels the same way, and people disagree about state-church separation, including people on the U.S. Supreme Court. There are actually some members, I'm sure you've read, of the Supreme Court, at least one, who actually believe in the devil. Did you read that about Scalia? The devil's a real person, and he says, what's so bad about that? That's a basic teaching of the Catholic Church, and there's millions of Catholics, so that's not a radical thought that there's a devil here in the 21st century. There was a Supreme Court justice named William Rehnquist. Many of you remember Rehnquist. He was the Chief Justice for a long time, and he was part of a small group of jurists who thought, they used the word non-preferentialists. They thought as long as government isn't preferring one religion over another, it's okay for government to promote religion. It's okay. We can do it as long as it's non-preferential. And Rehnquist was a Supreme Court justice who said, you know, we're taking this Jefferson's wall of separation between church and state too seriously. Jefferson just meant it as a metaphor, and it's a bad metaphor. It's not a good metaphor for how we should run our country. So those words prompted a song. There's no pedal on this piano, but I think we'll make it work anyway. We got to fight the battle of church and state, church and state, church and state. We got to fight the battle of church and state, or the wall come tumbling down. We got to fight the battle of church and state, church and state, church and state. We got to fight the battle of church and state, or the wall come tumbling down. Some say that the wall between church and state is just a bad metaphor. But if unbelievers can't be protected from the rest, then what is the Bill of Rights for? We got to fight the battle of church and state, church and state, church and state. We got to fight the battle of church and state, or the wall will come tumbling down. I've heard about that hero Joshua, but his accomplishments are not so great, because there's none like Thomas Jefferson and the wall between church and state. We got to fight the battle of church and state, church and state, church and state. We got to fight the battle of church and state, or the wall will come tumbling down. Know these next words. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. You know what that is? The First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. We got to fight the battle of church and state, church and state, church and state. We got to fight the battle of church and state, or the wall will come a-tumbling. Or the wall will come a-tumbling down. Is there some water on the stage by any chance? Can anybody? Didn't Jesus say if you give a glass of water to the least of one of these, something like that? One. Okay. Back in the 1970s, there was a young woman. Her name was Annie Laurie. She was in college. And, oh, thank you. Great will be your reward in, not in heaven, but somewhere. And whoever donated the piano, who was that? Oh, back there. Thank you so much. Very nice to have a real piano here. So, what's your name? Kevin. Thank you, Kevin. All right. Hey. So Annie Laurie was in college. Today, She and I are co-presidents of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And we actually met in 1984 on Oprah Winfrey's show. Did some of you see that show that we were on when I had hair? And the very first time I ever publicly spoke before any hostile audience, and the first time I ever spoke about my atheism, and there it was on TV, you know, so it was pretty exciting. And we later got married a couple years later, but so we have a videotape of the day we met, which is kind of neat. We showed our daughter Sabrina a couple years ago, and she was giggling and laughing at that show, not because we looked so young, but that audience that Oprah had picked was like totally, you know, Bible thumper. You know, it was really, really great TV if you watch it. Like, it was a pretty good show. It was pretty exciting. And after a couple minutes of nervousness, I got into it. Like, you know, I'd never spoken before an audience that was hostile to what I was saying. As a reverend, you know, we're used to all this adulation, and the congregation is always, whatever you say, you know. But then here's people arguing and disagreeing, and I actually liked it. I thought, this is cool. This is actually, I'm actually saying something that's getting a reaction from the crowd, rather than people sitting out there in church looking at their watch, thinking about the roast in the oven, they got to get home, and, you know, that kind of thing. So, but when Annie Laurie was a college student, in fact, she had been a lifelong complainer, you know, ever since she was a little girl. Even in middle school, she complained about the fact that girls had to wear dresses and boys didn't. And in cold Wisconsin weather, walking to school wearing dresses, this doesn't seem right. So she and her friends complained, and they got that changed, you know. Her mother was the first, she owned a newspaper, her mother, Ann, who's still alive, she's turning 87 pretty soon. Ann wrote the first editorial in the state of Wisconsin in the 1960s in favor of abortion rights, way, way back, and started the Women's Medical Fund to help poor women pay for abortions. It was started way back then. It's still running. It's the longest-lived abortion rights charity in the country. Who said atheists can't start charities and do good work, right? So, so now I'm digressing, but it's fun to digress. Life is a digression. So I did a debate with Dinesh D'Souza for the Cleveland Right to Life. I didn't want to do it, and I don't charge for debates. I don't, you know, I do a lot of debates. I don't charge. I just want to go do them. In fact, I'm doing my 110th debate in a couple of weeks in Houston. 110th public formal debate in front of an audience, which sounds like a lot, but the first one was back in '85. So I said, Dinesh, I don't want to do this debate. I want to get my whole weekend to go to Cleveland Right to Life, and, you know. But he said, I'll split the honorarium with you. And I said, you get an honorarium? So he got $5,000, so he gave me half of it. So I went and did the debate, and guess what I did with that check, $2,500 check? I signed it over to the Women's Medical Fund. So, so the Cleveland Right to Life helped about 10 young, poor women pay for abortion. So how, isn't that fun? But Annie Laurie has always been that way. She and her mom, they've always been campaigning and complaining. And so she was in college in the 70s, and she was getting ready to graduate, and she looked and she said, there's going to be a prayer at my graduation at the University of Wisconsin. Why? I'm the one who studied. I'm the one who worked hard, and someone's going to get up and give the credit to, you know, somebody else's God during my graduation at a secular university? And so she asked about it, and they said, well, we've always done that. 150 years, we've always done that. And she said, well, do we have to? And they said, well, you need to talk to the student committee. It's a student government thing that plans it. So she went to the student committee. She said, I'm graduating this year, and I saw there's going to be a prayer. Why is there a prayer here at the University of Wisconsin? And they looked at each other. Why is there a prayer? Well, we've always had a prayer. And Annie Laurie said, well, do we have to? And they said, do we have to? I guess we don't, do we? So they didn't. They stopped the prayer. They just said, okay, let's just not have a prayer. Nobody missed it, you know? And in fact, you know, a few right-wingers said, hey, there's no Jesus. Everybody, you know. And they stopped that 150-year practice. They've never done it again. And other universities in the state followed suit. The power of one person just making a complaint, complaining about a violation of state-church separation. So then she and her mom went to testify at some hearing, subcommittee hearing at the city-county building about women's rights. Something to do with, I actually don't remember the issue, but they went ready to give a 3-minute talk about this issue. But before the meeting started at City Hall, the city-county building, a priest got up and gave a prayer right before that. And
Anne got up to talk, and she kind of put her nose down and said, wait a minute, I came to talk about women's rights. The chief opposition to women's rights is the church, especially the Catholic Church. And here I come here before my civil government to talk about this, and there's the priest up there cozy with you government people. That doesn't seem right. Seems like favoritism, and their views are what we're actually protesting now. That's not right. You shouldn't open with a prayer. If you want to pray, pray in the car or at home or something, but not at my meeting. So a reporter came up to her. This was like early 70s, mid-70s. A reporter came up to Anne and said, that's interesting. You're protesting the prayers. What's your name? And she told her. And so, do you have a group or something? And she said, well, we're just a bunch of people who want to be free from religion. We want freedom from religion. And he said, that's your group, Freedom from Religion? And she said, yeah, we just want to be, So he wrote a story and he said, there's a group of people who want freedom from religion. And her phone started ringing. How can I join that group? How can I be this is great. And there was no group. So Anne said, well, give me your name and number. So she started with little index cards on her dining room table. All right. So then she said, well, I guess we got a group. And so she and Annie Laurie, her daughter, and she, and another man who since died, they started, well, we'll start a group. And it was just like a local kind of thing for a couple of years. But then it went national in 1978 with a few hundred members. And they had a little type, little thing, kind of how any local thing gets started, which is small. And today we're at 20,000 members. We've grown steadily over the years. We just hired, last week, we just hired our 5th full-time attorney to work on state-church separation issues. We are so crowded in our building. They're right 2 blocks from the state capitol in Madison, Wisconsin. If you ever come to the capitol, we're just right there on prime real estate, which we really got at a good deal back in 1990. But we're so crowded, we're having to expand. So we bought out the neighbor next door who owned the apartment buildings. Finally, it took 3 years to do that because he didn't like us. We had to pay a premium for a building and we're just going to tear it down. Well, we already tore it down. In fact, you can go online and see the demolition. Have any of you seen that? Andrew, one of our photographers, did a time lapse of this big Jaws of God kind of thing, In a day and a half, that whole thing was down. It was pretty cool. And then I played some silent movie music behind it. Go to our website. You'll see it. It's pretty neat. And Andrew thinks he wants to redo it and put somebody taking a shower in there, just as the walls. But so we're expanding our building. We're going to quadruple our space. And with 15 full-time staff now and a lot of legal interns, our primary purpose is to work to keep state and church separate, the battle of church and state that I just talked about. And we do that through lawsuits. Mainly we do that through non-litigation, meaning letters that are sent out. It's amazing what you can accomplish without going to court if you're persistent. Like Annie Laurie's complaint. It was just a complaint, and they changed it. So our attorneys have got really good now. They've got these template letters, and then they like to farm them off to the interns, make the interns do all the hard work. But the interns do a lot of work, and then the attorneys sign the letters. And last year, in 2012, we had more than 2,500 complaints come into our office from around the country. And maybe some of you sent some in. Maybe some of you noticed some violations that you sent in. And so our staff is ready. Sometimes they can get a letter out that day or the next day. Because if it's a school-related thing, they're praying at my graduation next week, or they're going to have a Christmas carol thing at our school, our high school, next Friday. You got to get on it right now. You've got to move. So out of those 2,500, about half of them we couldn't really do anything with. They weren't legally solvable cases. But the other half, we sent out letters. More than 1,000 letters went out, just primary letters, not counting follow-up letters, because there's a lot of follow-up that happens. Did we do one for you somewhere? Yes. Oh, good. In Little Rock, okay. So, and it's the same thing that Annie Laurie's doing as a college student, complaining, sending a letter of complaint, plus with the legal language. And if you see the letters, they've got it pretty organized on legal precedent, especially what federal circuit you're in or what state you're in, what state law is, because you want to make sure that it's conforming. And but we can't do a thing beyond that without a warm body, without a local plaintiff on the ground. Preferably, if it's a school issue, somebody with kids in that school willing to put their head up and say, I'm the complainer. Now, maybe that's not so easy to do down here in Arkansas. You might want to keep your heads down, and there's good reason for that. So, because your family and your job and your business and all that. So, but when we do have a complainant, even if it's kind of weak, even if it's just somebody who's in town doing business in town who noticed it, we can still write a letter. And that doesn't mean we can sue on every case. But last year we had almost 150 clear victories from those letters of a high school principal or a school board president or superintendent of schools or a mayor or whatever agreeing with us and stopping the violation, just like that, which is pretty neat. Any one of those 100+ victories might have been a lawsuit, but didn't have to be. Because if you just remind them of the law, it's kind of like mopping up. The law's already been settled. And sometimes we'll complain about voluntary student prayer at Texas football games. And so the superintendent or the principal or the teacher say, we're going to fight this and take it all the way to the Supreme Court. And we have to tell them, that's already been fought and already been taken to the Supreme Court, and you've already lost on this. You can't do that. Here's the law. Here's what it says. What you are doing, you are breaking the law. You are a renegade school. You are disobeying the law of the land. And what an example to your students. That you, superintendent, you principal, you think you can flout the law. Is that what you want to tell your students? You don't like the law, just don't obey it? So fortunately, there are some superintendents, and some of them, and I think this is kind of nice, they get to save face. Because some of them, they're elected or whatever, and they're members of the community, they're leaders in the community. Some of them say, well, I think we should have the Bible classes in the school because my faith is important to me, but I'm responsible for the budget here in this district, and we don't want to spend six-figure fighting these losing lawsuits, and the odds are that we might lose this. Is this the best use of our money? And so that gives them an out. It gives them a way to say, we don't want to waste the money. That's what happened in Jackson, Ohio, this victory we had over the Jesus painting. Did you follow that one? Hanging on a high school, a picture of Jesus hanging in the high school since the 40s. And the principal said, or was it the principal or the superintendent said, that's not coming down without a court order. So it came down with a court order. And they were really angry. In fact, they hid Jesus down in the basement closet or something. And then they bring him back out for like the 4th of July, and they'll put the picture up by the flagpole. And like Jesus is raised from the dead or something. But he's not in the high school anymore. He's not there. And so that was a good victory. And the religious right groups who fight us, they hate losing these things. But they love us. The religious right groups, the ACLJ and the Liberty Council, the Liberty Institute, and this group out of Arizona, they use us to raise money. The Freedom from Religion Foundation is trying to take away our freedom to believe and freedom to pray, so send us money. And they do. They use us to send money. So, they should be giving us an award because we're out there hustling the work. We're out there, we're not out roaming the country. It's you. It's people who come to us. We find a complaint, like the cheerleader thing in Coons, Texas, and then we bring it to the media, and then they get to write on it, and then they get to tell their supporters, we're fighting the devil, send money. And they do. They have lots of money that they are sent in. So, like I said at the beginning, in America, we're free to disagree, but we're not free to ask our government to settle the argument. The First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which I just sang, and which each one of you should memorize. I bet most of you have got it memorized, right? The whole thing. I bet half of this room could quote the whole First Amendment word for word, which is great. How many believers can do that? But if you notice the First Amendment, people have sort of summarized the entire First Amendment, those freedoms, those 5 freedoms, as the freedoms of conscience. Religion, speech, press, assembly, and to petition the government. We have those freedoms. The First Amendment does not grant those freedoms to us. It's acknowledging them. The government doesn't grant you these things. Our government, because if the government can grant, it can ungrant. If anything that can be endowed can be unendowed. We just own them as human beings. And our First Amendment is acknowledging those freedoms of conscience. But notice in the First Amendment that before those 5 freedoms are spelled out, which are us, the people, we the people, before those are spelled out, first there is a non-freedom. The very first words of the very First Amendment to the Bill of Rights is a non-freedom. It's the opposite. There's a difference in America between free speech and government speech. And in fact, if you're looking at an issue in your community or in your school or whatever, and you're trying to decide, is this right or wrong? Is this constitutional or not? Just ask the simple question, is this free speech or is this government speech? If it's free speech, we can say what we want, pretty much. Maybe depending what county you live in, but we can say what we want. It's America, this is freedom. But if it's government speech, if it turns out that it's the government speaking, then the government's hands are tied. The very first words of the First Amendment say, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Or, and then it goes to give the 5 freedoms, prohibiting the free exercise of religion and so on. So, government, Congress, shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. So there's 2 religion clauses in the First Amendment. The first one is called the Establishment Clause, which is our bread and butter at FFRF. The Establishment Clause is 95% of the stuff that we do is Establishment Clause work. Under constitutional law, that's the phrase. We're doing Establishment Clause work. And remember that there's a word before that word establishment, respecting. It doesn't just mean Congress cannot establish a state religion. It means Congress shall make no law respecting or leaning towards or dealing with an establishment of religion. And the courts have continuously treated that to mean that the government has to be neutral. The government has to back off, fold its arms. When the government is acting as government, speaking as government, the government can't take sides. We can disagree, but the government can't settle the argument, basically. So that Establishment Clause is very powerful. It's a wonderful part of our country, which means that we all are guaranteed our freedoms to believe what we want, to go to church, to assemble in church or not. Then after that comes what's called the Free Exercise Club. Free Exercise Clause. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So in other words, government can't get involved in meddling with your free exercise of religion either. So that's different. The Free Exercise Clause, we rarely deal with that because it's not like we think our free exercise to practice the religion of atheism is being hampered. It kind of is, but we don't consider it a religion. Most of us don't. So, as I said earlier, a lot of members of the Supreme Court even think that that wall of separation that Thomas Jefferson wrote about is really not a thing to base your law on. But the courts have consistently used that wonderful metaphor, that wonderful phrase. And in Jefferson's mind, that wall was two-way. The government can't mess with religion, and religion can't mess with government. The two have to be separate. That means that a human being who's elected to public office, who has personal religious views, when they're off duty, my dad was a police officer and he was a Christian. When he's off duty, he can say and think what he wants. But as soon as you put on that uniform, as soon as that high school teacher walks in the room, as soon as the mayor gets up and hits the gavel, as soon as the person is working as government, they have to hang their religion at the door. They have to act as secular civil servants, not promoting or hindering religion. That's hard for some people to do, isn't it? You've seen public servants who don't see that difference. Some of them think, I was elected, I can say what I want. No, you can't. You have free speech, but government does not. Government does not have free speech, and when you're representing the government, you're representing all Americans. So in any issue that you're looking at about separation of church and state, ask yourself that basic question. Is this the government speaking or not? Would a reasonable observer think this is the government represent? If you walk into City Hall and you see a nativity scene there, right, all by itself, no sign, nothing, it's just right there in City Hall, what are you going to think? Well, doesn't it depend? If it is government owned and government maintained, and it's there on prime property, right there by government, that sure looks like government speech, doesn't it? However, there are some parts of government I like to distinguish between the public sphere and the public square. The public sphere is all of us, and the public square is the government property, the government itself. There are some parts of government that have been set aside as what is called a public forum. A city park is a public forum. It's owned by the government, but you and I can go in there and we can get a permit to do stuff in a city park. As long as anybody can get a permit and you take your stuff with you when you leave, well, a public forum is a part of government square, the government, that is set aside for speech by the public, not by the government. So it might be that in your mayor's office or in your state capitol, there is an area that is known as a public forum. In which case, when you walk in there and you see the nativity scene, you're not thinking that's the government speaking. That's the First Baptist Church speaking. They got a permit to put that there, and that's representing their views, and there's a sign there. So you can walk. In fact, in our state capitol in Wisconsin, it's just like that. The rotunda, the first floor rotunda, which is the second floor, is a public forum. So there is a menorah, there's nativity scenes, and then we have our anti-nativity scene up every year, and our atheist display up there as well. So yeah, we have with the it's a little black baby girl in the manger, and then there's a Venus, and then there's an astronaut instead of an angel. It's really cute. It's a totally Thomas Jefferson is one of the wise men, and it's pretty fun. And why not a little girl? Because females are the species, and we men are a little bit mutated. Our Y chromosomes are and why not a little African girl? Because we all came out of Africa, right? I mean, the human race came. So anyway, we have ours there. Nobody walking through that state capitol on that first floor rotunda thinks that's the state of Wisconsin expressing the views. They know it's us. Or we know that nativity scene is by these wacko right-wing group that put that up, or whatever. So that's a public forum. So when you ask yourself, is that free speech or government speech? That's obviously free speech. When our permit is up, every year we take our stuff with us and we leave. It's not the state of Wisconsin stuff. It's our stuff. So there might be things going on in your city, or in a city park maybe, or who knows where. And you kind of have to do a little bit of research. You have to ask what's going on here. So I think there's nothing more important than working for the separation of state and church. It's a real problem to solve in the real world, as opposed to solving the phony problem of saving souls from a fictional hell, which I used to do for so many years. And the Freedom from Religion Foundation, we're continuing to grow. And if you have any complaints or questions, first of all, look at our FAQs. It might not be a complaint we can do anything about, but it might be. The FAQs will also tell you, before you contact us, what we need from you. Sometimes people just call from us and they say, do you know what they're doing? Do something about it. And then they hang up. What can we do? We need to know who's the principal and what's their policy and what is their practice, and who are you? Do you have standing? Do you live in that community? There's a whole lot of things we need to know before we don't want to go shooting off some letter complaining that's half informed. So we need help from you. Simple things like the address and who is the principal, or what's the name of that teacher, and what's the nature of the courses being taught, or whatever. We have lawsuits right now. Besides the complaints, we have lawsuits. I think there's 13 or 14. We're about ready to file a lawsuit in California, which I think is going to be pretty exciting. Maybe tomorrow or sometime this week. All the ducks are in a row, except for one little thing, which we might have to just forget about. But and we don't want to say where it is or even what it's about, because we don't want to tip them off. Sometimes if you announce that you're taking a lawsuit, then they'll change their practice somewhat. And they'll start bringing in a rabbi or a Hindu, and then they'll say, see, we're not pushing Christianity. So if you can get in fact, we've asked them repeatedly to stop and they won't. And people in town have asked them to stop and they won't. So we want to hit them with the lawsuit when the facts are clear and solid, and go from there. So I think that's going to be our 14th. They keep changing because we keep settling and moving. But one of the most exciting ones, I'll tell you one case and then we'll go to questions. I'll do one more song and we'll go to questions. The parsonage housing allowance case. We have 3 lawsuits against the IRS right now that are pretty exciting. The one that's getting the most attention is our electioneering lawsuit, where pastors are politicking from the pulpit. We're suing the IRS we're just asking the IRS to do its job. Follow your rules and go ahead and go after these people. The other one is with the 990 form. If you know, nonprofits have to file an extensive 990 report to the IRS that's accountable and open. So you can go online right now and see our 990 form as a nonprofit. You can see every penny we bring in, every penny we spend. You can see my salary. It's open. We're nonprofit. We're tax exempt, so we have to be accountable. But churches don't. Churches don't file 990s. Churches don't have to show where their money's coming from or how they're spending it. There's a huge room for abuse in that. In fact, we've seen abuse through that. So that's one of our lawsuits, complaining about the fact that we have to do this, and these religious nonprofits don't. That doesn't seem fair, does it? But the one that I'm the most excited about is the parsonage allowance, or the housing allowance. And a lot of people don't know about this. In the IRS code, there's a special provision, a paragraph, section 107, that says any minister of the gospel in the United States can exclude their housing from income. Can you imagine that, doing your taxes next year? Can you imagine taking your entire year house payment or rent and just excluding it from income? Drastically lowering your tax liability? Well, right now in the United States, any minister of the gospel, and by the way, that means any clergy, including rabbis. Rabbis are considered ministers of the gospel, according to the IRS. So there's about 500,000 clergy in the country that are doing that right now. And think of the burden on the rest of us who are paying taxes. I used to do that when I was a clergy. In fact, we have ex-ministers in our group who are retired, who are still getting a pension from the church. They're still doing that. They're still excluding it. So we sued. We tried to sue back in California in the federal court there, 5 years ago. But after the Wynn decision came down, we realized that our standing as taxpayers would probably not hold up. And that's a whole different story that we can't really talk about. I have a chapter in Godless about the Hine decision where the bar for standing has been raised, in other words. Before you can even get into court is what that means. So we pulled out. We were suing on that thing in California. We pulled out, and we decided to reformulate it. So now what we've done is the Freedom from Religion Foundation has designated for me and Annie, Laurie, and Ann a housing allowance. Every year, our executive board designates for us a housing allowance. It doesn't change our salary. It's just on paper. Part of our salary is designated as a housing allowance that we don't get to exclude. We work for a nonprofit. When I was working for a nonprofit church that was promoting the concept of God, I got to take that break. But now that I'm working for a nonprofit that's challenging the concept of God, I don't get to take that tax break. Is that fair? Doesn't it look like the government is taking sides, settling the argument about who's right and who's wrong? So we reformulated the case not on taxpayer standing, but on direct injury. So I am directly injured now because my bank account is smaller than it would be if so I got to tell you something. If you're going to sue the IRS, you better have been scrupulous with your taxes. The U.S. attorney came and deposed me and Annie Laurie for 2 whole days. It was the most boring days we ever spent. She came in with this huge red notebook, thick just on me. The government has all these resources, and they're digging and they're looking. She had all my tax forms from all of our way back to 2000 and whatever, looking at this line. And it's just like being audited. I mean, so fortunately we're fine. I mean, there's no, in fact, 1 year I underpaid, and so I just paid it right away. So there was no deal. So questions after questions after questions, and going through this whole thing, and then did our council actually designate a housing allowance and so on. So we came through. By the way, it was kind of funny. It was like a Columbo moment. They ask you, have you ever been arrested, or have you ever been a felon? They ask you these things. And just as she said, I think we're all done now, she's folding that big red thing up, and then she turns, one more thing. Were you ever arrested for drunk driving in Missouri? No. But doesn't that tell you something, how they're digging? Some other Dan Barker schmuck must have, got arrested in Missouri, and they thought, maybe that's him, and they would have caught me in a lie. But so the case was submitted to Judge Barbara Crabb in federal court, and she upheld our standing. The government challenged our standing, and we got over that hurdle. We have standing. So the government filed a brief, then, a motion for judgment. The government filed a brief, and you're never going to believe what argument the U.S. government used why Annie, Laurie, and I should not be taking this lawsuit, challenging the housing allowance. Can you guess? It's their basic argument is that Annie, Laurie, and I don't know that we would not be granted the allowance, that the government would not consider us to be ministers of the gospel too. That is their argument. You can read the brief. It's on our website. Read it. that, since we are doing work that's parallel to religious work, we are doing work we are sort of like atheist leaders. It's like atheist clergy, right? And that the Freedom from Religion Foundation is a nonprofit. And so, in a sense, we're kind of ordained by the Freedom from Religion Foundation. So we have not actually tested whether or not the government would not grant us that exclusion. In other words, next year I'm going to have to exclude it and then get penalized, and then I have real injury, right? Well, yeah. Yeah, exactly. But the judge had already gone through that in her dismissal of the movement for standing by saying they could do that, and we know they could do that, so why do we have to make them do that, right? And they're going to do that if we stop, So, I mean, it was like, what's the point of that, So, and I would do that, too. I would withhold it and get penalized and that whole thing, and then I'd really have to take a collection at a meeting like this. But so right now, and it looks pretty silly. Right now we're waiting for the judge to issue a decision on this issue. And if we get a win on this, imagine how that's going to be taken by churches and clergy all over the country. I wish I could talk more about that because it's a fascinating story. But we're trying to fight this battle. I have time for one song, maybe. Let me do this.
You remember when Governor Rick Perry of Texas had the big prayer rally for rain? Remember that at Reliant Stadium? We went down and protested it. The governor who prayed for rain and then the state caught fire. Remember that? We sued over that, and then a conservative young judge threw us out on standing, saying that we haven't shown that we were injured by the fact that the governor of, but we think it changed things because I actually went to that rally at Reliant Stadium, and when Governor Perry was introduced, he was introduced simply as, and now, ladies and gentlemen, Rick Perry from Austin, Texas. He was not introduced as Governor Perry. So I think they were realizing, wait a minute, we need to have a separation here. So I wrote this song in honor of Governor Rick Van Periwinkle, who overslept not 20 years, but who overslept 2,020 years. If you find yourself to be a resident of the Capitol or of the City Hall, as governor or mayor or as president, you're a public servant to us all. You were not elected as our pastor-in-chief, and preaching on the job is not a perk. Govern us with reason and not belief. Get off your knees and get to work. Get off your knees and start thinking. The answers will be found right here on earth. Unbow your head and open your eyes. Get off your knees and get to work. It makes no actual difference what you say to God. He may as well be Santa or an elf. Every time you bow your head and pray to God, you are only talking to yourself. If you run your office with propriety, your First Amendment duties you won't shirk. Everybody's tired of your piety. Get off your knees and get to work. Get off your knees and start thinking. The answers will be found right here on earth. Unbow your head and open your eyes. Get off your knees and get to work. Prayer won't fix the budget. Faith won't pay the bill. Hope will never nudge it. But taxing churches will. Get off your knees and start thinking. The answers will be found right here on earth. Unbow your head and open your eyes. Get off your knees and get to work.
So there's only about 4 or 5 minutes. Someone here has a question?
I want to thank you for letting me know that as an ordained minister in the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster, I can deduct my house payment because, quite frankly, it's large.
My question is about these huge gyms at churches. And in Arkansas, and I don't know if we still have it, but they were taxing, like when I went to the Little Rock Athletic Club, our membership and everything, they put a tax on us, yet these were membership only. They have a slide card. You cannot go to them at the Baptist church and fellowship. And it really pisses me off. That's my question. Is there any way around that they can be taxed too?
Well, churches will never be taxed in that way unless all nonprofits end up being taxed, because churches are seen to be a subset of a larger group. The Walsh decision pretty much settled that issue. So I think churches ought to be taxed. I mean, they're getting services, but our group isn't. FFRF is not paying taxes either. So it seems not to be unfair that all nonprofits, whatever it is, educational, scientific, charitable, religious, are not taxed. But what a lot of churches are doing is on their property taxes, they're kind of cheating by claiming tax exemption for property that's not really being used for their church, for worship. And if that gym is not really a church worship kind of thing, it might be vulnerable. They might have to declare it. In fact, it's a cute story, but we had a billboard in Columbus, Ohio that said, "You can be good without God." It turned out that the board was on church property, and the company didn't know about it, and the church complained, "What do you have this church on our property?" So we moved it. But then our attorney was thinking, wait a minute, a church has an income-generating billboard on their property. Shouldn't they be paying taxes on that? Well, they are now. Yeah.
A couple points. The Arkansas Highway Department will not allow billboards anywhere along certain highways, like the federal highways, only within 600 feet of a business, except if you're a church. Churches are exempt from that, and they can put a billboard or a sign anywhere they want along the highway.
Well, that doesn't seem right. That seems like it's favoritism to religion. So,
indeed.
Well, can somebody bring that to our attention? Somebody research it a little bit and send it to our intake in the FFRF, and our attorneys will know exactly what to do and how to find out if it's wrong, and then we can complain about that, and we can stop that, because they should be obeying the law. Great. If it's as you say, it doesn't seem right.
Well, a friend of mine built a liquor store, and he wanted a sign out there on the highway pointing to it, and that's what they told him.
You should call it Holy Spirits.
And something else, it is probably in many counties here, our county government is called the Quorum Court. And up there in Marion County, every month the meeting is opened with a prayer, and the county judge just says, "Okay, Joe, it's your turn." And he actually points to the next guy to do it.
Yeah, there's a case right now before the Supreme Court. Americans United has taken it. It's about Greece, New York. It's kind of worrisome because the Supreme Court decided to take the case. It's already a strong win on our principles, but the Supreme Court is looking at it. We filed a friend of the court brief with the court on this issue. So that decision is going to have an effect one way or the other on legislative prayer, like city, county, and city mayor prayer. So technically the law is that legislators can pray among themselves, but they cannot direct it at the public. And if you're going to your city hall or county meeting and they're actually praying at you, that's crossing the line, asking you to participate in the prayer. So at least that's our argument, and that's what the decisions have pretty much upheld. If they want to have a prayer in their back office among themselves, I mean, that's an internal, but...
I know you guys were involved with the Sunday sermons that the churches were doing. What was the outcome of that? I mean,
well, the outcome of that is that we filed a lawsuit challenging the IRS refusal to move against these churches. And in fact, some of these churches are glad we sued, because they would like to be denied their tax exemption so that they can take a lawsuit overturning the whole thing. They actually think that preachers and priests should get up to politic. Did you see that billboard marquee in front of a Texas church? Why is Texas always coming up? It said, in the last election, it said, vote for the Mormon, not the Muslim. On church property, you know. So, and that should be illegal. So the IRS is looking the other way. The IRS has admitted they don't have any power to police this. So if you knew that the highway had no police officers going down it, if you knew there was no speed enforcement, what would that do to your driving? Hey, you know. So the IRS is taking all the police officers off of this issue, and our lawsuit is to just ask them to do their job. If they would tell us that they've appointed somebody to go into this, then we'll drop the law. We'll settle the lawsuit. We just want them to go after these churches.
First of all, I love the podcast and listen to it.
It's a broadcast, actually.
Well,
okay.
Not for me.
Yeah, okay.
I understand why taxing churches is not something that we can fight, because they tax exempt all nonprofits. What I don't understand is how the government deciding which churches are legitimate is not establishment. Is not making a law regarding the establishment of a religion.
Yeah, and that's a good point, and we brought that up too. There's 3 prongs to what's called the Lemon test, and a government action is unconstitutional if it fails any of the 3. It must have a secular purpose, it must have a primary effect that doesn't advance or hinder religion, and it must avoid excessive entanglement with religion. And we kind of think that what you brought up there is the entanglement prong. Is the government too entangled with deciding, for example, on the clergy housing allowance, who is a clergy and who isn't? Is the government going to get involved with who gets to call them? Pat Robertson's organization, they're ordaining their janitors. Basketball coaches at Catholic high schools are being called clergy so they can get that. You know what I mean? And does the government have the right to come in? So there's that entanglement kind of a thing going on that we think the government should stay out, in which case there should be no benefits, differential benefits to churches. So the Flying Spaghetti Monster probably would not be approved by the government as a legitimate church. And why not? Why is the government making that choice? So it is a real good question.
They let me perform marriages, so I would think that I would get to live in my house for, yeah, good. Okay.
Can you tie the knot with spaghetti? That's not going to hold very well.
I was just curious how often you're running into groups like the Good News Club and Trojan Horse child groups that go into schools acting like they're different groups.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a problem.
Do you run into that all the time? Or?
Yeah, we do. We hear from people all over, and it's legal, actually. As long as it's after hours, it's legal. There was a Supreme Court case, the Mergens equal access case. So there's only 2 ways to fight it. One is to see if they're abusing it, if they're doing it during school hours, or if they're entangling too much. The other way is to have your own. Bring in your own and see what happens. So
it's okay for them to give flyers out through the school?
Yeah, schools have if they have a neutral flyer policy in the backpacks, if it's neutral, in fact, we tested that too. We sent some of our atheist flyers, and the school accepted them. So if the school itself cannot be accused of taking sides, then you can't do anything about it. If there's a neutral policy, parents can complain. If you're a parent and your kid's coming home with stuff, you can complain about that. But we couldn't legally complain. So the Good News Club, they are crossing the line. They're getting their toe over that line, and they're getting in it. And sometimes it's the same teacher. During school hours, the kid's in class with his teacher, and then the bell rings. Now it's the same teacher teaching after school. So in the minds of a 5th grader, that connection between state and church, you know, there's this authority, and their teachers now teaching them about Jesus. So that can be a real problem.
Do they have to leave the building? Or can they use
no, they don't. They can, in fact, they can do it on school property, and they can do it right after the bell rings. So after the bell rings, these classes are starting, and kids are going to their lockers or they're coming out of school. So it looks like it's another school activity, which we think is wrong, but the court has upheld that, which means that we can have atheist clubs or gay rights clubs or Flying Spaghetti Monster. We can do that too. And in some cases, if you try that, fighting fire with fire, sometimes schools have actually shut down their entire non-curricular because they don't want the Satanist gay rights clubs in there, and they'll shut everything down, which is kind of a victory. Are we out of time, or shall we?
Yeah, we're out of time.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, give it up for Dan Barker. Thank you.